just Tanner and myself this time. Because Tanner, congratulations, you have most recently finished running everyone through Journeys of the Radiant Citadel. It's an
Thank you, sir.
anthology that I was really interested in playing in. I got to play in all the adventures. So I wanted to get your thoughts on it now that you've kind of completed a campaign as a DM. I guess to start, do you want to explain to the class what Journeys of the Radiant Citadel is? I wish I had a physical copy. I realize I don't physically own that book, and I should fix that at some point.
Neither do I. Going purely off the digital version.
Yeah.
But yeah, Journeys through the Radiant Citadel, really interesting anthology book published by Wizards of the Coast. It came out in 2022, and it essentially is an adventure book. It's an anthology, so a bunch of standalone adventures. But what makes it special or unique is the entire conceit behind it is all these adventures are based in real world locations and specifically places that are underrepresented in high fantasy traditionally. So all the authors are people of color, coming from diverse backgrounds from all over the globe. So you have settings that are inspired by, southern rural U.S., but also places in South America, in the Middle East, in Southeast Asia. A few adventures that are set in Africa, and that makes it really, really different because it's not your traditional Tolkien style Norse Anglo-Saxon high fantasy.
Yeah, it's specifically to shout out those authors. I did pull up the list. So there are 14 adventures in the Radiant Citadel, I believe. Um,
13 adventures
13
that go through
adventures.
level 14. Yeah.
Okay. And each of those adventures has like a an author from the culture that they're basing them off. So real quick, Salted Legacy was written by Serena Marie, Written in Blood, Aaron Roberts, The Fiend of Hollow Mine, Mario Ortegon, and if I fuck up these names, I'm sorry. Wages of Vice, T.K. Johnson, Sins of Our Elders, Stephanie Yoon, Gold for Fools and Princes, Dominique Dickey, Trail of Destruction, Alistair Guzman, In the Mists of Manavarsha, Mimi Mandal, Between Tangled Roots, Pam Ponzalin, Shadow of the Sun, Justice, Ramin Arman, The Night Seas Sucker, D. Fox Harrell, Barry Dynasty, Felice, Tsui Hui Kwan, Orchids of the Invisible Mountain, Terry H. Romero. And then there were some additional supplements that were written by the team. Beyond the Radiant Citadel, Tayyib Empire was Banshir Goose. Beyond the Radiant Citadel, Umizu was written by Miyuki Jane Pinkard. And they were all led by Ajit George, who did not write any individual adventure in the book, but kind of edited the whole thing, drove the creative vision, and did write a separate time adventure that was in Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, called the Domain of Dread Kalikari. So it is two things to me that are really important that Tanner mentioned. One is obviously the diversity of authors here, but then also this is to me the biggest project Wizard of the Coast has done in like the past decade and a half that's been a new IP. This isn't
Hmm.
some like Magic the Gathering world or going back to Forgotten Realms for the billionth fucking time. This is like for all the old heads that are like, why don't they create new settings? This is 13
Yep.
new settings, 27 really new settings that like and 13 adventures in those
Right. How many
settings.
times can you go back to Chult
Yeah,
or
yeah,
all right, it's going to be in Baldur's Gate yet again.
yeah,
You know, more adventures in Icewind Dale, which I love all those things too.
yeah,
But you've got all this untapped potential in this world. Um, yeah.
yeah. It's definitely coming from a player. Um, the book itself, like untapped potential, is maybe the keyword I'd use to describe it. As like a product, I think I'd rate this like 4 out of 5 stars, somewhere like 3.5, 4 out of 5. There's a lot of good stuff in there, but I think what I witnessed playing it was the, and then going back and reviewing. the limitation in maybe it's the page count. Like obviously, this ended up being a physical product. There is somewhere they had to be like, oh, we only get 100 pages or whatever the page count is. Tanner and I are heathens. We basically just use digital resources, so I could not tell you what the actual page count is, but I recognize that's a limitation, and because of that, it did limit certain things. Things that I liked about Radiant Citadel as a player. The setting itself is really, really cool. This like as someone who's a Mass Effect fan, this felt like D&D's like Mass Effect, their Citadel, where it's like these civilizations coming together, but also
Yeah, I guess we didn't mention the geography
the
of
Citadel
what the
itself.
Radiant Citadel actually
Yeah,
is. Yeah. So the Radiant Citadel in this world is a kind of like a small floating city that was built on the fossilized remains of some giant creature um, that exist floating in the ethereal plane
yeah,
of the D&D cosmology, kind of separate from the material plane. And then, like Cameron was saying, what makes it special is this a hub site for all these other civilizations that where all the adventures take place in those civilizations. The civilizations and the realms themselves all exist in the material plane, and you have some magic teleportation to go back and forth. So the Mass Effect is a good example. It's kind of the place where all of these civilizations can get together and trade, have discussions about diplomacy, etc.
and
And acts
and
as kind of like the hub site for all these adventures.
and that to me is maybe my favorite thing is the Citadel itself, and it's a matter of personal taste. The individual civilizations are one they are really flavorful in unique ways. It felt like each adventure showed off a different aspect of society. They had some things in common, but each individual civilization really was doing its own thing. And then the
Hmm.
Citadel is it's kind of represented as this hodgepodge, like a New
Yeah, it's a
York with the
melting pot.
UN. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
you could easily imagine in your mind's eye like all the different architecture, right? It's probably got little villages and like subsectors that represent the different civilizations and probably
yeah.
lots of really good restaurants. Very
Yeah.
much like a New York City or one of those big international cities.
And I could feel like if someone was taking this and they didn't want to run the adventures itself, there when I read the book, there is enough there about the Citadel that I think you could run a campaign without ever leaving the Citadel. Like you could
Yeah, yeah.
it's
More like
got
a urban environment,
yeah.
for sure.
It's the Citadel itself is unique in that I mean it's described as utopian. Like there's no lack of resources. People are coming there. It's immigrant stories in general. People
Hmm.
are fleeing the troubles of their homelands. But there is an undercurrent of like issues and stuff. There's plenty of I think meat to chew on for a DM who wants to like homebrew something
Yep.
in using that setting. And then each of the adventures, I'd say they act as really good little guides. Like here's a microcosm, here's a slice of this world. But then what I noticed is in the each chapter is an adventure, and then at the end is a gazetteer about that civilization. And there's a lot of stuff in there too that like the way you set up the campaign, we didn't use it because we were focused on the adventures in the book. But if
Yep.
someone wanted to go in and do like, oh, I want to do a whole campaign in one place like Shankabumi, like you can do that.
Yep, for sure. I mean, the way they're all written is you can imagine any of these locations because they exist in the material plane. A DM can grab the location, drop it into anything that they're homebrewing, whether it's in Forgotten Realms or Sword Coast or wherever, and just say, "Yep, your party stumbles upon essentially what is ancient Persia." And you can either use the story that's written in the book there, or you could expand upon it. They did a really good job in this book of giving a lot of narrative loose ends for a DM or players to use. The Radiant Citadel is filled with them, where they have these examples of all of these things, these mysteries that are left unsolved by the book. They don't give you, hundreds of pages of appendices where they over describe the world. They just say that the Citadel was disconnected from the material plane for a few hundred years. And as a DM, you can either use that, leave it as a mystery in the world. They don't ever really explain the details of it. there's this giant evil cyclone that is always existing off in the distance called the
Yeah,
Keening Gloom that they describe in the book. They say it's out there, but then they don't, you know, kind of go through and over explain it. They're just like, hey, as a DM, if you want to use that, go for it. Otherwise, it's just this interesting mystery that exists in this world.
and spoiler, like Tanner did use that, but yeah, when I read through the book, I was like, oh, like that's really just like a paragraph. It's not like a big thing. It's just this
Yep.
thing that's described. The other
And
thing,
all the individual like realms have those as well, right? Just little
yes,
mysteries that are left unfinished, untold, like, hey, here's some political squabbling that is happening in this realm. We're going to talk about it in the adventure, but you could build your own homebrew off of this entirely. So
yeah.
it's kind of cool that way.
The other thing I want to mention is we said it earlier in passing, but the 13 adventures are not the only civilizations in the book. There are 15 civilizations, um, with two of them mentioned in the back end of the book, but not an adventure. And then there is one civilization that is a mystery, one of those mysteries that Tanner mentioned, that the
Yep.
book doesn't even tell you what it is. You got to kind of sleuth it out with some context elsewhere. And then there's a total of 27 original. So there's plenty of room for like you to take, okay, I'm going to take the Citadel, but I myself am, I don't know, like native Hawaiian or something. I want to make a civilization based around native Hawaiian mythology. Like I
Yep.
think there's not explicit instructions on how to do that, but there's plenty of examples and guides to do that.
Correct. Yeah, like I think that definitely if you're that person, yeah, I think it's a great example. If you're native Hawaiian and you're like, man, that no adventures ever take place in Hawaii, or if they do, they end up just becoming a beach episode of, just regular D&D. Um, there'd be no reason you couldn't create your own world, slot it in as a Citadel realm, and it be completely within this cohesive world.
Yeah, and they give a good framework for that. So there are these Concord jewels that are essentially like teleporting massive like freightliners or something that go between the Citadel and a civilization. So all you have to do is
Yep.
like, okay, I'm gonna come up with here's my color of my gemstone, here's my jewel. The other thing you come up with is your Dawn incarnate, which is, I guess, this kind of segues into things I didn't like about the adventure book. The Dawn incarnates are really cool ideas. They are these crystalline. They can be animals. I think almost all of them are animals. There's one
Some of
flower.
them are trees.
Yeah, I thought that
Yeah.
shit was stupid. They should all be animals. They should all be animals. That's personal taste. That's entirely subjective.
Yeah, you're
But
like, but they're basically mascots for all the civilizations.
yes,
Maybe that's a bit reductive to call them that, but essentially every civilization that is reconnected with the Radiant Citadel, there's a preserve where these massive crystalline uh, beings wander around that are essentially like a nexus of spiritual energy from the Citadel itself.
yeah,
Um,
it's like a mix between a graveyard and a data bank that you can like sometimes access, but not always. Like
you know,
if you want guidance. The my complaint is due, and it's due to page count or budget for artists. There's a lot of beautiful art in the book. Every civilization needed an icon, like they needed an art piece of their Dawn incarnate.
yeah,
You,
like if you're gonna start that and
they
you only
did
do
like
two of them,
four, or
yeah.
yeah. There's like the
Well, I think
penguin, the eagle, the scorpion, and a flower.
the tiger. I
The
think one of them was the
Oh,
tiger.
you're right. The tiger had a picture, but it didn't have a standalone picture.
And then yeah, because I wanted to one to play a role in one of our adventures, so I like cobbled together one in Photoshop myself that looked
Yeah,
completely janky next to the rest of them. I'm
yeah.
like, all right, you have to suspend some disbelief here.
It was a good effort, but like they dedicated a lot of art space for NPCs, which I appreciate. They had every civilization had a monster, I think, like a here is, I mean, they had all sorts of monsters, but here is this
Hmm.
civilization's like unique monster. The
Yep.
art for those was beautiful, even if I think I have some complaints about the stat blocks, which we'll get into.
Yep.
But then you every civilization had a map of like a city and then a map of the country. But they in that budget should have been every civilization gets their Dawn Incarnate as a standalone image for DMs to use. That seemed like a miss that didn't have to be.
Yeah, you could almost imagine like the front page of each civilization starts off with a cool piece of art with the Dawn incarnate.
Mhm.
Only because I think it actually speaks to such a cool idea.
Yeah,
It's a miss that they didn't just do it for all the civilizations.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah. It's like instead of damning with faint praise, we are like lauding with like faint criticism. Like this was
exactly.
so cool. Why did he give more to us?
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
I guess.
What was your favorite realm
Oh, okay.
in the
So
group?
I'm biased. Akrin Sengar is the Persian civilization. I think that was still my favorite. It had some really interesting political dynamics. I liked the fact that it was a mix of ancient Persian Zoroastrian mythology and like modern Iranian unfortunate politics. Like there is a theocracy that has hold of the country that there are groups rebelling against. Not my
Yep.
favorite adventure, but my favorite civilization. If I had to pick a second, and I don't know if it's recency bias, but the last one that we did, which was the Orchids of the Silver Invisible Mountain.
Mm-hmm.
Venezuela just seems like a cool place to like base something off of with its
Yep.
biodiversity and everything.
Yep.
And that one felt like a much bigger civilization than the adventure like had room for even.
Yep.
Like there was a lot going on there that like you mentioned that like
Yep.
we probably could have dug more into.
I cut a ton of stuff out of that one, just because there was, yeah, so much going on. And yeah, in that adventure itself, it almost becomes a little bit fetch questy, and the fact that it's like go here to then go here to then go here to then go here.
Yeah.
Um, but that is because it is such, like you said, a big, diverse world.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Atagua would, I guess it would be a tie. It Akari and Sengar is my favorite because of my biases, and then Atagua and God's Breath are probably where I'd split my second and third somewhere. What
yeah.
about you as like DM?
Yeah, I would say the ones that I really gravitated towards um, were, and there's a few of them that really stand out. The Adventure in God's Breath, Written in Blood, is like Southern Gothic horror set
We
in like rural Southern U.S. Think like Alabama, Mississippi, and that one just was such a cool horror story, like I just a traditional ghost story that I absolutely love that one. I really liked the one right after it, Fiend of the Hollow Mine, which was set in kind of like Mexico City. And it had a Day of the Dead theme, which was pretty badass. Um, I realize now these are all like consecutive. I don't know, maybe apparently like this run of them were some of my favorites. And then
the
Wages
first
of
half.
Vice was right after that one, and which was set in a New Orleans Mardi Gras kind of setting, and the civilization is named Zinda. So I'd say, yeah, those three. Maybe it's just coincidence that they're back to back. I really enjoyed those realms and those adventures, and then I really did like the setting of Akarin Sangar as well. And
I'd
I
say
really liked that one just for the what you said, and I'll just kind of echo what you said is the way that they created this like almost like Zoroastrianism with Iranian Revolution kind of nods to like modern day theocratic and political strife, and like I think the author did a really good job of painting that world with all the different goings on there, without being like too explicit about what he was going after. So that was cool.
I'd say in terms of civilizations, I don't think there was any misses, but there were misses in adventures and structure. And I think this is
Yep.
something you could speak to as the DM. You had to wrangle things together a little bit. What was your, I guess, favorite adventure to run, and then least favorite adventure to run? What I guess, least
Yep.
favorite or took the hardest amount of changing?
Yeah. So I guess before jumping into that, we should describe how I decided to run the book, because the way the book is written is a anthology where all of the adventures are standalone. There is no connective tissue between them. Like we mentioned, the different realms themselves are all uh, geographically or magically connected to the Radiant Citadel, but there's no narrative through line between the books,
And
so DMs can.
these are not countries on one planet. These are like the compared to other anthologies like Candlekeep, where it's like, oh, you can go to like these cities on this continent. These are essentially different planes of existence, every single one of them, and they just happen to connect to the Radiant Citadel.
Or they're all on the material plane, and maybe they're on the same planet, but geographically separate, right? Not easy to walk necessarily from one to the other, is the vibe that the book gives. I don't know if it explicitly states that. The way I decided to run it was I ended up running it on our Discord as an open table game. So it was first come, first serve. People could come in. I didn't have like the same group of people. Though by the end, I had the regulars who were joining. Yourself was one of them. But I decided to create a narrative through line to connect them all together, just so it was a bit more of a cohesive adventure that was not at all in the book. So that was something that I had to jerry rig, sometimes elegantly, sometimes clumsily, but it required, to Cameron's point, some changing of the way that some of the adventures are written. That way, I always had the same bad guy, right? This cult of a demon lord named Pazuzu, who
Which
ends up being the bad guy.
that did come from like that was inspired by something in the book. That wasn't like you didn't have to throw that in or pull that out from your head. That was something from one of the
Correct.
adventures.
Yeah, it was the third adventure in. They introduce that the one of the bad guys is this demon lord, and he seemed like a pretty cool bad guy to then repurpose as the big baddie for the rest of the adventures.
Yeah, it was interesting reading it like it because like these demon lords they're big things in the D&D universe, and this one adventure is like, yeah, this guy like prayed to Pazuzu and he got turned into an owl, and it's like, oh, okay, but like that feels like it should have been a much bigger deal, and again constrained
Yep.
by page count, so it makes a lot of sense to take that and be like, oh, he wants to fuck with the Citadel,
Yep.
let's move forward from there.
So like, and I promise I will answer your question on my least favorite.
Yeah,
I'm getting there.
yeah.
But the what it required me to do then is to go through all the adventures and figure out like what do they have that's similar and in kind that I can already kind of build off of. Um, so essentially, what you find in all these adventures is a lot of them are based in some kind of spiritual disturbance, which I think makes sense because that's pretty common in mythology and fantasy. So if you're writing a story, a lot of things are, ghost stories, lots of horror elements, lots of unrest, um, restless spirits, and that shows up again and again and again. So then it was not too difficult to say, okay, there's some evil cult that's behind it in all these civilizations that's kind of disturbing these spirits, and then use that as a way to connect the adventures together. Some of them were easier to do that with. I would say that the one that I struggled the most with was the one in Yongjing, which was based in real world China. That one was less about like spirits and was more about a uh, I don't know,
Like
political,
a
like
government
bureaucratic
conspiracy.
conspiracy. Yep. So that one didn't have like the natural place for me to shove in, oh, there's an angry ghost, which was like 90% of the rest of the adventures.
Conveniently,
Uh,
we did have one of our players that was one of the regular players was from Yongjing and was definitely playing into that like government agent kind of thing. So I think you
yeah.
were able to make it work. But you're right that it
Yeah.
wasn't as strong as the others.
Yeah, it didn't, and I think a running it on its own, you could probably do more with it. But since I was trying to connect it to a larger adventure, that one was definitely tougher to do. There was a bunch of other ones too where they are definitely written very railroady, right? Where it's like you're expected to go to this place, to this place, to this place, to this place, and because they're also trying to thread the needle of creating these big worlds that you can do more with, like Tagua and some of these other ones, they give you so much stuff. And I'm the type of DM where I actually really want the players to choose where they go, and I don't really want to constrain people.
Yeah.
And I found myself more times than I really wanted of like, you want to go there, but this other NPC is like, hey, what about this other part of the map that
Yeah.
you really need to go to?
Yeah.
And I felt I was forced to do a bit more railroading than I would really want to just because it's like I only have so many battle maps and this is where the story must take us.
Yeah, and this is not criticism. This is praise. Tanner started out advertising these as one-shot adventures and then quickly pivoted to these will take however long they need to take because there is one he's not trying to like speed run the adventure for the party, but also the book gives a lot to work with. I think if I remember, so my least favorite adventure might be unfortunately Shadow of the Sun. It is the one with Akari and Sengar. It
No,
was not.
no.
It wasn't the way you ran it, but it became my least favorite when I read it in the book and I realized what you changed. You improved it. So okay, so this is gonna get political. There are like three factions in Akrin Sengar, and there's essentially the conservatives who are with the Atash, the uh I forget
He's
his.
like a theocratic leader, right? He's
Yeah,
a an
he's like if the
angel.
Pope was an angel. Yeah, if
Yep.
if yeah, if a fucking imam was an angel.
Yep.
And then there is the Silent Roar, which was the guys who don't like what's happening, um, and they are resisting. And then there is the Ashen Heirs, who are the actual revolutionaries. What pissed me off, and this had to I would not want to lay this at Justice's feet. I think that this was probably a directive from on high. I can't imagine an Iranian American writing a story like this. But the conflict in the adventure as written is between the two revolutionary groups, where one side is like, you guys are being too extreme.
Right.
Uh,
There's like the anarchist, we want to burn the whole system down, and then there's the other more like pacifist revolutionary group, right?
Yeah, instead of like a conflict between the revolutionary groups and like the theocracy. So like
Yeah.
that left a bad taste in my mouth. But that's not the way Tanner ran it. I think you opened things up so that we could choose who we were supporting and figure things out there. The other
Yeah.
one I'd say, and I think you ran it pretty much as is, and I just think it wasn't a strong adventure. Gold for Fools and Princes. This was based off
Mm,
like the Mali adventure, the
yeah.
Mali Empire, and it if I remember right, it was essentially like just
It's a dungeon crawl,
yeah, a
right?
dungeon crawl, but the dungeon is like a line. Like it
Mm-hmm.
didn't really there wasn't much exploration. It was just like go down this tunnel and you'll find stuff.
Yep.
Um, that one felt on the weaker side. In general, though, I had a really fun time running things. There was stuff like the Night Seas Sucker, based off like West Africa, I think.
Mm-hmm.
That was a really fun. Like you tied that one in really nicely, where that was like, oh, this MacGuffin in the book.
Yep.
It's purely a MacGuffin. It doesn't do anything, but it's a thing people want. You
Which there's a
tied
lot
in
of those in these.
Yeah, you tied it in nicely with like, oh no, this is like a weapon that Pazuzu wants, and that was a fun like little underwater adventure and stuff. Yeah, yeah.
Yep.
Overall, um, I'd say if the reader or if you're watching this as a dungeon master and you're looking for an anthology to run right out of the box without changing anything, Radiant Citadel might be a middle of the road offering. I think Candlekeep Mysteries and Tales of the Yawning Portal are stronger, but this is better than like Keys to the Golden Vault and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think it's also a great place for DMs to like steal cool locales and
Yeah,
something that is different. And because they're based in real world locations that you rarely see in D&D, or there's not at all, or any high fantasy, it's a really cool way if you want to just add some diversity, both like geographically, but also in terms of cultures, into a homebrew world. You could easily steal one of these things.
yeah, and expand it
Um,
out to be a full. And to that end, I guess for you as a DM, was there a civilization that you're like, oh, may not now, but maybe sometime in the future, like you want to come back to or you want to spend more time with?
Yeah, I think it's probably still the three that I mentioned earlier: Written in Blood, Fiend of the Hollow Mind, and Wages of Vice. Probably Wages of Vice because I feel like New Orleans Mardi Gras shenanigans is a cool setting in general.
Yeah.
And actually, I'll go back to what you said originally was the Radiant Citadel itself. We didn't really do a ton of stuff in it. I used it as we always start the adventure in the Radiant Citadel, but then I quickly shoo the group like, okay, guys, jump on a Concord Jewel so we can go do the real adventure. Probably underutilized there. Like I said, you could probably do a whole urban adventure within the Citadel with different factions and different places. If anything, I would say one of the other missed opportunities in the book in general is all of these civilizations were written independently by their own authors, and very rarely do they actually talk about how does this civilization interact with the Citadel itself. The Citadel actually almost becomes this thing that once it's discussed in the intro of the book, rarely makes an appearance
Yes.
at all in the rest of the stories. And I think that's a missed opportunity. I would love to know which of these civilizations um, are like really heavily invested in the Citadel, have good
They're
relations with
standing
them.
on like the Citadel Council. Their
Yeah,
relationships with each other. Like
which are the
does
ones that are like constantly like they see the Citadel as another oppressor to them?
yeah.
Like, there could be a bunch of tensions the same way I imagine it if like as a
Like do
UN or a NATO or
yeah, do
like
Yonito and Yongjing fucking like hate each other? Like
yeah, exactly. Like I think the one of the missed opportunities in the book is any relationship between the civilizations themselves or the civilizations in the Citadel because they're written as these standalone adventures.
mhm.
You're right. Yeah, I'd love to know which of the civilizations get along well, which ones don't. I don't think in a single adventure they have a character from another civilization as an NPC, which I think is a real missed opportunity. Like, I
Yes.
would love for there is an NPC in one of these worlds who is traveling by way of the Citadel from another realm, just
Yep.
to show more of the connection.
Yeah, it clearly illustrates the Wizards of the Coast, the way they, I don't know, I won't call it writing style, almost like the way they approach a project. They have a project lead, and then they're doing a bunch of things in parallel so that those pieces, like, they don't have time to either commingle in interesting ways or make things fit together perfectly.
Yeah,
And it's more, I think that's more a nature of like the way the audience for these books, Wizards of the Coast, I think doesn't really sell books for dungeon masters. They sell books for a general audience to read, and they happen to be something that you can play, which is unfortunate. And then two, the timeline on these things. I know that they have like tight printing dates and things like that, so you don't have that kind of detailed review process that you'd have in other
yeah. Or
products.
maybe what you're missing is like a Kevin Feige in the Marvel universe. Not saying that's a great example, but someone who can like at least like tell the authors like, hey, or give them ideas of like, hey, you could steal some ideas from this other
Mhm.
person's civilization and pepper it into your own. I think they wanted to give the authors agency and independence to write their own adventure and not feel constrained by the Citadel and not give them like narrative constraints. The downside of that is you end up with the standalone part feels very standalone.
Yes. Yep.
Um,
And that is I think another like I'd say minor criticism. Both the standalone part and the fact that the Citadel itself is underutilized. It's got a great like gazetter. The city is interesting. I think the things that I wish were included. I don't need an adventure in the Citadel, but I know there were things that you added on as a DM, shops and neighborhoods and things like that. Just
mhm.
more of that, but again, constrained by page count and things like that.
Yep, and it's something that Wizards of the Coast could do more in the future, right? Because it
Yep.
sounds like as they've been putting out more source books, the Radiant Citadel is going to be considered canonically
Yes.
part of this world, right? So I could see them in the future building off of it more and more.
It's very promising that it is in the 2024 Dungeon Masters Guide. I am knocking on wood. I am hoping that Ajit gets tapped for more journeys through the Radiant Citadel or journeys of the Radiant Citadel 2. And maybe that's the opportunity now that they have established these like 15 cultures. Now they can
Mm.
start like mixing them up and interacting with them or something. Yeah.
Yep. One of the things I really enjoyed about it is the fact that we probably didn't mention this enough that you get to experience and learn about the different cultures as well. And it's a good opportunity for those authors as a way of like sharing things that are important to these real world civilizations and mythology, and
Food
then
and festivals.
food. exactly. That's what I was about to say. Like, it's amazing how many of them start off or are based around some sort of festival. And I think it makes a ton of sense because if someone was like, "Hey, how would you teach someone about your culture in like in its most distilled form?"
Invite
Right?
them over
It's
for
like a
dinner.
synopsis.
Yeah,
Invite the like, all right, come to when we do our yearly party
yeah.
because you're
Ada
gonna get the
Norus for
music, you're gonna get
persons.
the
Yeah,
costumes, like you're gonna see what is important to our culture, whether it's song, what kind of food is important. Not all of them were based in a festival, but it became kind of a running joke in our campaign since we were doing it
and
all like back
honestly,
to back to back. It was like, oh, now you're at this festival. Now you're going to this festival.
yeah, for the DMs, if you don't want to do a big bad, you could easily be like, okay, we're gonna do all these adventures in a campaign where we're shield bearers and we have been hired by each civilization to go provide extra security for a festival. Like that would be a very valid way to go through the adventure. Um, but
Exactly.
but yeah, it does do a really nice job of like again, I think it's a balancing act. They don't want to do, oh, this is fantasy Venezuela, but you can tell where the inspiration comes from, and you can tell the personal stakes the author has in conveying a part of themselves in the civilization.
For sure.
Let's see. So we talked about the book itself. I think I've got a specific question. So you talked about your narrative through line in the campaign. Was there? You mentioned what was hard to tie in and what was not. I know Salted Legacy. I think what did you run that adventure before you had the Pazuzu idea, or was it a deliberate choice to like not tie that into the rest of it because it's the introductory adventure? It definitely had a different tone than I think the rest of them.
Sure. Salted Legacy was so it's the very first adventure in the book. You start off in level one, and then if you follow the book as written, your characters level up to level two in the middle of the adventure, which is kind of interesting for a one shot or what is meant to be a one shot. Um, but that one obviously because it's a level one slash two adventure is very low stakes, right? You're basically competing in some market games, like different competitions. You play like a game of hide and seek with some caterpillars. You do like a cooking competition. No, I made the deliberate choice with that one that I wanted to start off low stakes. I
Day
didn't
in the
want
life.
Yeah, exactly. Like I didn't want to just like all of a sudden as a level one character, there's a giant demon lord that appears in the middle of this cooking competition. Use it more as an introduction. And then I knew I didn't want to introduce the big bad until a few adventures in. So that was a like a deliberate choice on my end.
And that adventure, Salted Legacy, I'd say does work as a pretty good introduction to the setting of that civilization, but it's also the Radiant Citadel because it is low stakes. I think
hmm
um, there's
Honestly,
like
it'd be a good adventure to run if you have new players and you're looking for one of those level one
mhm.
intros, right? Um, it's a good way of teaching D&D mechanics because it's a bunch of market games.
Yeah, it's it's
So you
it's got investigation, it's got social role playing, it's got some combat, but the combat is not lethal combat. The only pillar it's missing is exploration, but I feel like D&D is missing the exploration pillar, so that's not a big
right
deal.
in general. Yep.
Yeah.
So a good encapsulation of a good level one D&D intro, I think.
What about this was you literally like 2 weeks ago we finished Radiant Citadel, and then last week you finished your second campaign. So, but this was your first campaign you ever like. Uh, this was your first time DMing, or you did some
I
small
done
stuff beforehand?
one shots before, so this is
Yeah.
the first time that I've taken a full campaign, either started one and now started and finished one all the way through.
How
Uh,
how I guess how was that process for you? How did you go through? How did you feel about DMing now that you've done it?
yeah, for sure. So I think in total, I ran it as an open table campaign, which there are things that I found I liked about it and then didn't like about it. Open table campaigns are great from a scheduling standpoint. I get to choose hey, I'm going to be playing an adventure Saturday morning on this date because it works for my schedule and I
Yep.
can prep in time, and I will take whoever is available. And we're lucky enough to have a broad enough community where you can just do that. The downside to that is I think I would have. I'm the type of person. I think most people like the idea of a reoccurring group to build up like the story arcs for your characters, instead of constantly having people come in and out of it. So like the storyteller in me, or the part of the DMing that I like, which is building those stories. Um, there are a few of you guys that end up being the core members. But I stayed true to the open table where I didn't guarantee anyone on a spot. Um, I would definitely say, well, let me step back. It took just over 2 years to run all of it, because I was not running adventures every weekend. It was probably what, once a month or twice a month, depending
It's like
on
once every
schedules.
3 weeks on average. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And then also these stories, while you could run them as one shots if you really, as a DM, like pushed your players and kept them from lollygagging, I did not. I let you guys take your time. So each adventure itself was probably, 2 to 3 sessions, with each session being like 4 hours.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, I would say what I learned most about it is a few things. One is, and maybe again, this explains why I really liked the level 3, 4, and 5 adventures the most. I think for me as a DM, I definitely enjoy the lower levels of characters. um, I think as we got into like the higher and higher levels, and combat takes longer and longer as you guys have longer spell sheets to go after and more feats and features that are playing role, and the mechanics get crunchier and crunchier. It's probably where I started to not lose interest, but definitely like miss the days of the simpler adventure.
Yeah, and part of that's probably due to the open table nature as well, because you had players that would join in for their first time at like level 12, and it's like they know how
Yep.
D&D works, but they don't know that level 12 character.
Right.
Uh
And then I don't know that level 12 character, right? I haven't gone on the journey with them to see them level up. So it's
yep.
just like, uh, getting all of a sudden out of nowhere a level 12 character that I have to wrap my head
It's
around. And I will be the first to admit that I do not have all of the nuances of D&D at higher levels like committed to memory.
I'd say it's absolutely that open table format, because I've noticed it. Like I run Rime of the Frost Maiden and Waterdeep with the same group throughout. I didn't have issues, but I'm running Candlekeep now, and I am seeing those like things pop up. The other thing I'd say is I don't know why, but these anthologies, not just Radiant Citadel, but Candlekeep, certain older ones like Tales from the Infinite Staircase and Tales from the Yawning Portal, those are older adventures that they redid in 5th edition. Those
Yep.
don't have this problem, but the new adventures, they don't seem to be sticking to the rules of the design intent of 5th edition, which is having a certain number of challenging encounters in between long rests.
Yeah, yeah.
So like it wasn't your fault as a DM, but I think early on you noticed you needed to adjust and pump encounters up.
Oof.
Otherwise,
Yeah.
like they became very trivial. And I feel like Radiant Citadel in particular, because of its focus on these social aspects, combat was not like downplayed, but was not emphasized the way maybe an open table game would want it to be.
That was a really big learning for me as a DM, and especially not like a super experienced DM, because I was used to running one shots where you essentially can just run them as written and have a fun time, right? Um, but yeah, I definitely learned pretty early on that the all of the encounters, at least for the group that we were playing with, and maybe part of it too is on our Discord we have a lot of experienced D&D players, like way too trivial. Which I think can be fun sometimes, right? Where it's just like, we're just gonna plow through these enemies and have a good time. But over the course of a campaign, like, why even do combat? And it's interesting because I'm so used to just following the encounters as written. I never really contemplated it, and I didn't find it out until we're actually in the middle of the encounter, and you all are breezing through enemies, and I'm like, well, shit, that was supposed to take longer. And then I tried to counteract it. My first strategy was just okay, instead of having them fight three of these whatever random goblins, you're gonna fight five or six of them, right? I'll just double, which is a bad strategy. It turns out that it ends up making the fights take longer because now you've got more HP pool characters to kill,
But they're
but they're
not
not any
actually
more
more
difficult.
threatening. Yeah.
Yeah, so it ends up just making the combats worse because now they just take longer for you all who haven't, you're not threatened whatsoever, and you're just like slowly chipping away at their HP. Um, so, you know, I chalk that one up to my inexperience, or at least especially as we got to the higher levels, inability to get a good sense for making combat difficult. Because ultimately, I think combat that is difficult is more fun for these longer campaigns. For a one shot where you just breeze through the enemy, whatever. But for it's like, okay, my character's just been steamrolling bad guys for the past 50 hours.
I will say I think you did towards like you were figuring out your feet and you adjusted things pretty nicely towards the end. I feel like so like Salted Legacy, Written in Blood, Fiend of Hollow Mine, Wages of Vice, and I think those ran pretty simply. I think Wages of Vice and Sins of Our Elders is when you started noticing that, and then I
Yep.
remember you first adjusted in Gold for Fools and Princes, that one, and then I think even like Trails of Destruction, which we haven't mentioned Teletepic, but Teletepic is also another awesome civilization, and that was a pretty good adventure. I
Hmm.
think that's the one where you were like, okay, I need more enemies, but enemies that have like stronger abilities, enemies that can like maneuver, things like that. And then after
Yep.
that, it felt like when there was combat, it was generally more challenging. So every now and then there'd be a miss, but I think
Yep.
overall, I think you adjusted pretty nicely.
I think I got better at it over time. I think one of the things I struggle with is I still wanted to stay true to the locale. So, you can't just randomly pull a D&D villain from, I don't know, some random monster stat block that doesn't fit the world. Um, so that was the other place where as I was trying to add my own enemies, um, struggled with trying to figure out, okay, what's an enemy that would make sense to be in Tlatepic or in Akharin Sangar that doesn't just seem out of place.
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, I had a ton of fun playing it, and this was the first time I got to actually play in a campaign that completed a. I've essentially in fifth edition I've played a bard in a campaign that I took over as DM, and then I played a warlock in a campaign that has been on hiatus for a while. It might be coming back this year. We'll see. But it was fun to, especially because it was 2022. It's like the end of fifth edition before the revision. So I played a paladin, and then through the story, I ended up in Teletepic. I think I got some warlock levels. It was yeah for me. I had a blast just getting to be able to be a player. Um, I think we've already talked about like how you've manipulated how you needed to change the campaign to make it into an overarching story. I guess is there any other lessons or anything that you took as a DM or anything you'd do differently if you ran this or another campaign in the future?
Yeah, certainly combat. I think that I've learned enough now on this idea of having like a through line narrative. Where if I was going to do this again with something that's an anthology, maybe reading through more of the books later on to already have kind of a plan of how they would come in. There were a few times where I kind of got caught off guard by a book and realized it didn't fit into an adventure. It didn't really fit into the narrative I was trying to tell. Um, but yeah, no, I definitely recommend reading through Journeys through Radiant Citadel if you're a DM. And yeah, like we'd mentioned, if you don't steal like all of the content, picking one of the realms that you find interesting or you think could fit into to one of your adventures, and I think they do make good, one shots or short modules as well.
And if you fall in love with the Radiant Citadel, like I really enjoyed it. I've picked up some extra adventures. It's nice The same group of authors have done a book called Journeys Beyond the Radiant Citadel. It's only $10. It expands some things. It adds some extra information, especially about the two other civilizations. It There's a book called Encounters in the Radiant Citadel. If you want to add in what Tanner was mentioning as one of the book shortfalls, is more things to do in the Citadel itself. There is People have done like standalone civilizations and published them. Escape from Shurok is one. I think Shurok is like the author's own civilization that they did. There's the Fire Spider Egg Hunt, which is an encounter in Teletepic. The Black Lotus is an adventure in Shankabumi. The Sard Palace of Geroda is a Tayyib Empire adventure by David Keir. Yeah, there's a book called Journey Around the Radiant Citadel, which just adds like more items, more NPCs, more tables. So I like we said earlier, the fact that it was represented in the 2024 Dungeon Masters Guide gives me confidence that they're going to be returning to this place, especially with the fact that this is an IP that Wizards of the Coast owns all themselves. It's the new D&D IP. It's not a Magic the Gathering thing. I would love for them to do a sequel book, more adventures, or maybe like fuck it. If you want to milk me dry like Wizards of the Coast, here's what you do. You issue two books. You do one which is purely setting. Make it like 200 pages and it's all gazetters, maybe monster stat blocks, like that sort of
Yeah.
thing. Um,
Items, just a pure source
yeah,
book.
maybe even subclasses. Like I feel like the Dawn Incarnates would be really cool Warlock patrons.
Mm-hmm.
Like that sort of, or like that sort of stuff, and then do another book that's like here's another 15 adventures, or whatever you want to do, or a campaign if you don't want to do an anthology. I think there's enough stuff here to do like a full campaign. So I do hope that Wizards of the Coast returns to this setting because it
For
was it was a
sure.
ton of fun to play in.
Yeah.
I guess any parting thoughts?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, it was a blast. Thank you for coming on and talking about this. I
Yeah,
do.
thanks for playing in the campaign.
Oh, it was, yeah. I'm glad I got a chance to. I do find it funny. We get reviews of books when they come out, but it's like you can't possibly fucking know like the good and the bad when you read it. You gotta run it,
Right.
and I think
Yeah.
for
And this
anyone.
is, yeah, hundreds of hours of playtime to fully experience it, and that's with leaving a bunch of shit out.
Yeah, yeah. So if anyone is considering running it or picking it up, I think Tanner and I both highly recommend. There's work to be done to make everything fit together the way you want, but I think that's true for any D&D book or any TTRPG book. Yeah, it was a blast. Thanks again for talking with me, Tanner.
Yeah. Thanks, bud.
All right, bye everybody.
Bye.